Welcome to our Alumni Nutrition Talks series, a celebration of 40 years of training nutritional therapists. I'm Heather Rosa, the Dean, and I hope you enjoy this presentation.
Hello and welcome to this nutrition talk where I'll be talking about nutrition for autoimmune disease. I'm VJ Hamilton, I'm a registered nutritionist and I work specifically with individuals who have autoimmune conditions. I studied at the Institute for Optimum Nutrition and I now use what I studied by helping clients who have autoimmune conditions and chronic illness to overcome their symptoms or manage their symptoms with diet and lifestyle. I have my own personal story when it comes to autoimmune disease. I lived with symptoms of autoimmune disease for over 25 years and I was diagnosed with alopecia areata and psoriasis, and also I had a chronic illness of chronic fatigue syndrome which developed after having a virus. I discovered the Institute for Optimum Nutrition in my early 30s and I was already passionate about science at the time, and I decided when I went to an event there that I wanted to become a nutritionist, and actually I started working on my own health as well. And through doing that, I have now been symptom free for over 8 years. And I really truly believe in the approach that you can take by understanding your own body and the underlying issues that are in your body, but also the nutrients that are required for your body to function optimally. And the effect that nutrient deficiencies can have on the body is huge. I often have clients come to me and ask me if nutrition can make a difference when it comes to an autoimmune condition. And of course it can. There are so many reasons that nutrition can help with an autoimmune condition. And when we talk about the contributing factors to the development of an autoimmune condition, we can understand more how nutrients and nutrition can help with these conditions. So let's start by talking about what an autoimmune disease is. Well, an autoimmune disease is defined as a condition where your own immune system attacks self-tissue. And self-tissue might be a particular organ, it might be a component of your cell, or it might be an enzyme or compound in your body. And through your immune system attacking that causes you to have symptoms and it causes damage to that system or that organ. That means that can lead to a disease. And that's when we develop an autoimmune condition. For example, with alopecia areata, the immune system is attacking the hair follicle, and the hair follicle is meant to be an immune privileged site. What that means is that the immune system shouldn't be able to attack the hair follicle, but for various reasons that can happen in alopecia areata, and that means that the hair is unable to grow and that can lead to hair loss. So that's just one example, but there are other conditions like systemic lupus, which is attacking the DNA of the cell, or we have something like multiple sclerosis, which is attacking the myelin sheath, which is over the nerve. And there are lots of other autoimmune conditions like Hashimoto's, which is attacking the thyroid, or celiac disease, which happens to attack the gut lining when somebody eats gluten. And there are many others, but the reason that you end up with the symptoms is that your immune system has started attacking self-tissue. And the immune system is so complex. It has a way of detecting those auto-antibodies, so those antibodies that attack self-tissue, but that function can become dysfunctional for various reasons. And that's what I want to touch on next, the underlying causes of autoimmune conditions. And there are 3 factors really to consider when it comes to an autoimmune condition. The first is the genetic susceptibility piece. And for example, in my own family, I have several members of my family who also have an autoimmune condition. We don't have the same autoimmune conditions, but there is definitely some genetic susceptibility in my family dependent on the environment. And when it comes to autoimmune disease, there isn't just one gene that means you're going to develop an autoimmune condition, but it's more likely a cluster of a certain genes, when they're brought together, means that you are more likely to develop an autoimmune condition. And that's what I'm seeing in my family. The other piece is the environment. And when it comes to environment, that can mean various things. It can mean the environment that the air that you're breathing in. Is there any toxicity in the air you're breathing in? It could be to do with the food that you're eating. It could be to do with your stress response. There are lots of different factors within your environment that can affect you. And it's when that genetic susceptibility piece is exposed to a certain environment that you end up developing an autoimmune condition. And there's a third factor to consider as well, and that's to do with our barrier function, whether it be in the gut, in the skin, in our mouth, in our lungs, in our vessels. When that barrier is broken down, it can cause the immune system to become triggered, because, for example, in the gut, when we have something called leaky gut syndrome or increased intestinal permeability, particles that are in the gut, for example, bacteria, viruses, food particles that might not be fully digested, can get into the bloodstream, and that can fire up an immune response. And one of the major factors when it comes to an autoimmune disease is the inflammatory piece. So when we are inflamed, and we have those autoantibodies to self-tissue, that can cause this response in the body and cause the immune system to start attacking self-tissue. So the more that our inflammation is reduced in our body and the less inflamed we are, the less likely we are to have those autoimmune type symptoms. And when I'm working with a client, that will be the first piece that we will look into, because if the inflammation is there, they're more likely to be in an autoimmune flare. And again, that's the thing with an autoimmune condition. You are never fully cured of an autoimmune condition, but you can live symptom-free. And the way to live symptom-free is to avoid going into an autoimmune flare. And there are various ways that you can help with that. So when I'm working with a client and we are thinking about what they can do from a nutrition perspective when it comes to an autoimmune condition, is really looking at bringing in some anti-inflammatory foods, because anti-inflammatory foods are so key. What can happen with an autoimmune condition is that your body can be in a state of oxidative stress. And oxidative stress is where you have more free radicals in the body than antioxidants. And what that means is that when we have a lot of free radicals, which are naturally produced by the cell, but can be produced in higher amounts if there's any toxicity in the body or any if there's a high viral burden or many other factors, but it is a natural process when we're producing energy. But what can happen is if those build up, the cells think that they're in danger and they trigger a response to the immune system. And again, that can fire up inflammation. So we need to neutralize those free radicals as much as possible. And that's how antioxidants can help. And part of an anti-inflammatory diet is bringing in antioxidants. So what are antioxidants? Well, they are those colorful pigments that we find in plant-based foods. So the colors that we see in vegetables and fruits. And a great place to start when it comes to your health is to think about the amount of color in your diet when it comes to these whole foods. How many of those foods are you eating every day? And if I look through one of my clients' food diary and I can see that there's just not a lot of color, there's not a lot of vegetables in their diet, then that is the first place that we start. And you can use a color chart so you can see the different vegetables in each color, and just bringing in an assortment of those fruits and vegetables into your diet every day can make a huge difference. And I really like using the color chart, which you can tick off. And if you have children, they like to tick it off as well. But you can just use this as a rule of thumb. You can just make sure that you have 3 different colours on your plate for every meal. And if you do that, then you are really helping yourself when it comes to making sure that you're getting enough antioxidants. And when somebody told me that I should be eating 10 portions of fruit and veg every day, that terrified me. But the truth is, you don't have to be eating that amount of fruit and veg just in portions of fruit and vegetables. Yes, it's good to get about 5 portions of fruits and vegetables into your diet, especially vegetables. But there are other ways that you can get the antioxidants into your diet. For example, you can get these through herbs and spices, and you can make up a big pot of herbs with olive oil, and you can keep that in your fridge, and then you can drizzle that onto your food, and that's going to give you a really good amount of antioxidants as well as your vegetable portion. So you can just use that as a coating for your vegetables, and that's just adding to your antioxidant load. On top of that, you can also have things like smoothies, and you can add a lot of vegetables and fruits to smoothies as a base, but you can also add in certain powders. And I really like the more natural powders, like the black currant powders, the cranberry powders, acai, lucuma, moringa. There's lots of different ones out there. And so you can easily put that into a smoothie. So again, you've got more antioxidants already just by having that one smoothie. So you've got the vegetables in there. You might put spinach in there, or courgette in there, or cauliflower in there. You can add in either some berries or some fruit to that as well, depending on the recipe. And then you can just add in one of those powders. So there you have lots of antioxidants in one meal or one drink. And you can do that with soups as well. So just making sure that when you're making food, you can easily throw in some extra spinach or some extra vegetables. And that's how I look at a recipe. I will often make a recipe, but on top of that, I will throw in some spinach, or I will bake some vegetables. And baking vegetables is really easy. You just put it in a low heat oven. You can just pop them in there for 15 minutes while you're making your other food, and then you can take those out, and you can even keep those in the fridge and have them for snacks, which is another thing that I like to do. So just making sure in your diet every day you are getting those vegetables in. And that has been an absolute game changer in my own health. At one point I was reliant just on microwave meals, and I wondered why I got sick and got chronic fatigue syndrome. And I hadn't really thought about the amount of micronutrients that I was eating daily. I focused more on protein and making sure that I was, getting enough protein and carbohydrates in at one point. Rather than really thinking too much about micronutrients, but they're so vital, especially when it comes to autoimmune disease. The other nutrient which is extremely important when it comes to an anti-inflammatory diet is omega-3s. And omega-3s are essential fatty acids which are found predominantly in oily fish. And a lot of the time, my clients don't love oily fish. You can also get the omega-3s from plant-based foods as well, such as flaxseed, chia seed, and walnuts. But that type of omega-3 isn't as easy or as bioavailable as the omega-3s that you will get from fish. And it's just worth knowing that, because if you're not having any omega-3s in your diet, then you really need to start incorporating them into your diet in some way, because when it comes to the inflammatory response is balanced between our omega-6 essential fatty acids and our omega-3 essential fatty acids. And omega-6s are found in nuts, seeds, but especially industrial seed oils that are used in a lot of processed foods. And I find that it's not very hard to get the right amount of omega-6s in the diet, but when it comes to getting enough omega-3s in your diet, that is a lot more difficult. So again, it's worth just reflecting on how many foods are you eating at the minute with omega-3s in them, and how many times a week are you eating oily fish. And I like to eat a different variety of oily fish throughout the week. So I'll eat salmon. I also love sardines and mackerel, and sardines are a great snack or a great food to have for lunch, because you will ordinarily eat the bones as well. So you're not only getting the omega-3s, but you're getting some key nutrients and minerals when you're eating them, which are extremely helpful and supportive for the immune system. So that is a nice thing to be adding into your diet. And then you can think about supplementation, but when it comes to supplementation, it's always best to work with a nutritionist to make sure that it is going to be right for you. So that's where I look at when it comes to an anti-inflammatory response. And then the last nutrient that is absolutely key when it comes to autoimmune disease is vitamin D. There is lots and lots of research around vitamin D. And the reason that vitamin D is important is because it helps with the immune tolerance. And I spoke at the beginning about the reason that people develop autoimmune disease is because your immune system stops being tolerant to self-tissue. So what should happen, for example, with the hair follicle, is the immune system shouldn't ever consider attacking the hair follicle. But for various reasons, which I'm probably not going to be able to get into today, but for various reasons, what can happen is the immune system can then start attacking the hair follicle. And it's because the immune system has become less tolerant to that hair follicle or less tolerant to that self-tissue. And it means that the immune system is then getting signs that the hair follicle shouldn't be there, and it's unknown to the immune system. So the immune system is doing its right job. It's thinking, there's something not right here, as it would if you had a virus or bacteria, and it starts to attack. But the great thing about vitamin D is it really helps with that arm of the immune system and supports that arm of the immune system. And what you can find is when people are vitamin D deficient is that their immune system does go haywire and starts attacking self-tissue. And by increasing your vitamin D levels, that can really help with your immune response. And one of the best ways to increase your vitamin D levels is through sunlight, but we have to be safe when it comes to sunlight. But those oily fish, again, especially the sardines, are a great way to get your omega-3s in, but also your vitamin D. And from a plant-based perspective, there's a little trick that you can do when it comes to mushrooms. But if you leave a mushroom in the sunlight, it will absorb the vitamin D from the sunlight, a bit like we do. And what can happen is you can have an increased amount of vitamin D in the mushrooms you eat if you leave them in the sunlight. So that's a little trick that you can try if you want to increase your vitamin D levels. The next thing to focus on when it comes to an autoimmune condition is focusing on your gut health. I mentioned that it's when we have a breakdown in a barrier, especially with something like leaky gut syndrome, that can be a factor when it comes to an autoimmune condition. So making sure that your gut health is as strong as it possibly can be and making sure that you're not having any digestive symptoms is important. And I think a lot of people again, it's going back to making sure that you're eating enough plant-based foods and vegetables, is we're not eating enough fiber. And when I first started on my own health journey, I would track my food in a specific app, just to get a good idea of, my macronutrients and also some micronutrients and where I might be deficient. And I was quite surprised to see that I was deficient in my fiber intake. And I think it's quite easy, especially if you're clean eating. For example, if you're having, and I use that like clean eating, especially if you're having, for example, a piece of fish or some, meat, and then you're just having vegetables and that's all you're having, and especially more of the salad-based vegetables, you're probably not getting enough fiber. So it's just worth checking in on that, because for our, digestive system to operate as well as it can do, we need to make sure that we're getting enough fiber, because fiber is feeding those beneficial gut bacteria. So as much as polyphenols, so those antioxidants that I mentioned in those plant-based foods, they feed our gut bacteria too, but we need fiber to feed those gut bacteria. And the amazing thing about our gut bacteria is they produce something called short-chain fatty acids, one being butyrate. And they have shown that butyrate can really help bring that immune response back into balance. That is absolutely vital when it comes to an autoimmune disease. We need to bring the immune response back into balance. And those short-chain fatty acids that are produced by our gut bacteria can help with that. But we need to be eating the right amount of fiber. And you can bring fiber in through eating lots of root vegetables. That's a nice way of bringing fiber in, making sure you're eating some healthy grains. I particularly love wild rice and buckwheat, and quinoa actually is another thing that I really love to include in my diet. And then the legumes, like adding lentils and chickpeas, and they are easy things to add. If you're making a bolognese, you can make a bolognese with beef, but you can also add in some lentils. And I always just think about every meal as, how can I make this as nutritious as possible? I absolutely love food, but I think about a meal and just think, I want to enjoy this. I want it to taste good, but actually, can I add in a bit of nutrition, like extra nutrition? And I'm not going to see any difference to it. I'm still going to enjoy it, but I'm going to get that like added benefit. And that's how I think about every meal. And, there are just certain things that you could just easily throw into soups or sauces or whatever your favorite meal is. You can just heighten it a little bit with different types of nutrition. And fiber is, a key piece of this. And as I said, it's feeding those gut bacteria, it's feeding those beneficial gut bacteria that produce short-chain fatty acids. And that's going to help with your immune response and your gut barrier function, which is absolutely key. Omega-3s are also important for the gut barrier function. And so is vitamin A. And vitamin A can be lacking in a lot of people's diet. Most of the vitamin A, which is retinol, the most active form of vitamin A, is from more animal-based foods. So if you're not eating a lot of those, and it's quite easy to be deficient in that. And I really love cod liver oil. I think it's a really great thing that you can add, and it's easy to add, and it's natural, and it has vitamin D and vitamin A in it, as well as those fatty acids. So that's something that I like to incorporate. But when it comes to fiber, one of the most beneficial types of fiber that can feed a beneficial bacteria in the gut and help with this short chain fatty acid production is the pectin that is in the apple, in the skin of the apple. And a really nice way to release the pectin is to stew your apples, and obviously stewing them with the peel on. So it's very easy to do. You can just boil, cut up some apples, boil them, for a short period of time. You can add in some cinnamon, mash them up, and you can keep those in the fridge for a couple of days. And you can just add them to your, your oats in the morning, or chia seed pudding, or you can just have them with some coconut yogurt or whatever you like. And that's just a really easy way to get pectin into your diet. And that's as I said, a beneficial fiber that is going to help to feed those gut bacteria. So when it comes to diet, I'm looking at that anti-inflammatory angle. I'm also looking at ways that we can feed our gut bacteria and help our gut barrier function. And another way that you can do this, you do need to be a bit careful if you have any type of histamine issue, but is to bring in some bone broth. And bone broth has some key amino acids in it, which help with that gut barrier function and help with connective tissue. And bringing in bone broth or collagen powder, which you can have on a daily basis, can help with that as well, especially if you are deficient in those nutrients. And there's various types of functional testing that you can do to look into that. But it is quite a nice, way to make sure that you're bringing in those key amino acids that can help with that particular connective tissue. So they're the two angles that I'm looking at. I'm also making sure that my clients are eating nutrient-dense foods and making the most of every meal. And that really brings me on to the next point about thinking about what we've talked a lot about, how we bring down inflammation and oxidative stress in the body, but what is causing the inflammation in the first place? And there are various factors when it comes to an autoimmune condition, but today's talk is about nutrition. So I'm going to focus mainly on diet. And when it comes to inflammatory foods, some of the key ones are the more obvious ones, like the ultra processed foods and the high sugar foods and the foods that have a high amount of oxidized fats in them. They are going to create havoc with your immune system, and they're going to create a lot of free radicals in the body, and they can produce these things called advanced glycation end products. And it's almost like if you think about a creme brulee, and we have that top layer of the creme brulee that's all browned, that's actually what can happen inside your body, into the cells in your body, if you eat a lot of sugar or these oxidized fats, and they can just create a lot of damage. And as I said, when there is any damage, your immune system then is fired up, and that's when we become inflamed. So the best approach is to eat as many whole foods as you possibly can. I know that's not always the easiest, but it's to find convenient foods that aren't high in sugar or aren't ultra processed. We want to be looking for things with less ingredients in them. And to be honest, you want to be looking at something with 5 ingredients or less at the absolute most. And they need to be ingredients that you understand and they don't sound like chemicals, because when there is any kind of chemicals in there, it's more likely that your immune system can be stimulated and triggered by those. So for anybody with an autoimmune condition, it is important to be eating as many whole foods as you possibly can. And if you are going to eat something more convenient, to eat something that is as close to the whole food as it possibly can be. And for example, when I'm looking at dairy-free milks, I'm really looking for a milk that has nuts and water, maybe a bit of salt in it. I don't want to buy a dairy-free milk that has 10 ingredients in it. And, sometimes when I'm looking at these dairy-free milks, I'll have a lot of added fats to them. And that's not my intention when I'm drinking dairy-free milk. I just want a little bit of milk to, add to my cup of tea or something. I don't want to be adding a load of fat to my cup of tea. So it's just worth looking at the ingredients labels. And for anybody with autoimmune disease, when you're thinking about foods that might trigger you, just getting used to those ingredients labels is helpful, and to just have a bit more of an awareness. And I know I would just pick things up, and if it said natural on it, or even if it said, there's even some organic foods that you need to be careful of. If you just turn the pack round, read the ingredients list, look at the amount of sugar in the food as well. And I would normally say, when it comes to sugar, you want to be opting for something that has 5 grams in 100 grams or less. That's just the way that I operate, and the advice that I give my clients, because that can be quite helpful just to make sure that you're not getting too much sugar. I mean, sugar is a whole other complexity, but when it comes to autoimmune condition, if you have a dysregulated blood sugar response, that can create inflammation and cause issues with the energy system in the body and the cellular function. And one of the main symptoms I see for anybody with an autoimmune disease is fatigue. So getting your blood sugar balanced is important. And when it comes to blood sugar dysregulation, there can be something called insulin resistance, which is where your cells have stopped responding to the hormone insulin, which is really important in regulating your blood sugar. And when that happens, again, you need to be thinking more about your cellular health. And that's where those antioxidants can help to neutralize those free radicals. So it's going back to the advice I gave at the beginning around making sure that you're having enough of those colorful plant-based foods in your diet. And just making sure that you're not overloading your body with all these inflammatory foods. You may know that when it comes to autoimmune conditions, or you potentially heard this, that there are certain foods like gluten, dairy, soy that are more likely to be inflammatory. And there is research behind this. I mean, we know specifically for celiac disease that gluten is the trigger for that. So in that case, we know we need to take gluten out of the diet. But food sensitivities are can be a major factor here, and they can be triggering an immune response. And you need to find out what's right for you. And as a nutritionist, we will use an elimination protocol if we think food sensitivities is at the heart of someone's condition. And normally when I'm speaking to a client, they might say to me, oh, when I have gluten, I get so bloated. So I'm thinking at that point, maybe if we, see how my client feels with taking gluten out of the diet for a month, that might be helpful. Obviously going through all the right testing with the doctors as well. Or somebody might say to me who has rheumatoid arthritis, when I have dairy, my hands become really stiff. And again, there's research around how food sensitivities can cause an autoimmune condition. It's through a process called molecular mimicry. And it's when we eat a certain food, and for example, it has a pattern on it that says ABC, that's presented to the immune system. But there is also a thyroid cell that has ABC on it. And what happens when that's presented to the immune system is your immune system not only attacks that food that's been presented to it, but it also attacks your thyroid cell. So that's how it works with a food sensitivity. There are various other things that can happen with food sensitivity as well, because they can trigger inflammation, and they can also cause an issue in the gut. But that elimination protocol, where you are taking out a certain food for a period of time, seeing if your symptoms improve and then reintroducing them, can be really helpful to get to the bottom of what the sensitivity is for you. I'd say when it comes to processed foods and ultra processed foods and high sugar foods, we know that they are more likely to trigger inflammation. But when it comes to a specific food like gluten or dairy or soy, it's completely personalized, and it's going to be different for each individual. There is also something called the Autoimmune Paleo protocol that was developed to take out all the potential inflammatory foods. And that protocol can be helpful, and I have used it in my clinic. And I have seen some good results doing it. But unfortunately, what can happen is, if it's not done under the proper guidance, is people can stay on that diet for a long period of time. And as with any food restrictions, that can then lead to imbalances in the gut and can have a knock-on effect with other systems in the body. So it's definitely worth, if you are thinking about doing anything like that, to work with a nutritionist. But hopefully, just by bringing in those nutrient-dense foods, bringing in those anti-inflammatory foods, supporting your gut health can take you a long way in your autoimmune health. One of the things that I did for myself when I first started out was I was so reliant on microwave meals that I just thought, actually, maybe if I take my microwave out of my house, I'm not going to be able to have microwave meals anymore. And it meant that I had to start cooking from scratch. And I was extremely busy at the time. I was a chartered accountant. I was working long hours at the office. I was socializing. I was doing exercise in the morning. And I thought, no, I need to prioritize this. And I realized that actually I can just put a piece of salmon in the oven with some baked vegetables. It will take 15 minutes and I have a full meal. And gradually I started learning different recipes. I mean, I had loved cooking as, a teenager and in my early 20s, but I just got engulfed in the corporate world and just felt I didn't have time for it. But once I started learning what I needed to do, I realized that it wasn't as hard as I thought it was going to be. And also I started to really enjoy cooking, and it was the time for me to really calm down. I'd either put on some music that I liked or a podcast, and it was just a really cathartic time for me at the end of the day when I was like, I just took a breath and I enjoyed the cooking process and just zoning out into what I was listening to and the process of cooking itself. So it had dual benefits for me doing that. So I know there is a lot to think about here. Just take it a step at a time. I know it can feel very overwhelming. You don't have to do anything too complex. There's lots of juices and some really difficult recipes which have 20 different 20 different foods in it and lots of different herbs and spices. You don't need to start there. Just start making a shift or a slight change in your health can make a huge difference. But focus on those three key factors when it comes to nutrition. So it's anti-inflammatory foods, supporting your gut health, and making sure that each meal has all those nutrients in it that you need, and vary it up every week and every day. Even if you start with a 3-day rotation or a 2-day rotation, just keep adding to your repertoire of recipes. And eventually you'll hopefully be in a position where you're going to have, a month's option of recipes that you can use. And so that keeps your diet varied, and just making sure that you're getting those key nutrients in. So I hope you found this helpful. If you have an autoimmune condition and you would like to find out more, I also have a podcast, The Autoimmune Reset, where I'm sharing lots of information on there. And my business is called The Autoimmunity Nutritionist. So you can find me on my website, which is www.theautoimmunitynutritionist.com. I wish you all the best with your health, and thank you for listening.
If you enjoyed this presentation, then click on the link in the description to subscribe to our Nutrition Talks email list. And don't forget to click the like button and subscribe.